Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to the BBC's World Have Your Say. We're live from the City Club of Cleveland. It's a real thrill to be back in a city which has a long connection with World Have Your Say. We've been on WCPN longer than we have done on any public radio station in the States. We first came here in 2006, then again in 2007, but it's been a long 4 years, and it's very good to be back. And what a venue we are in today. The beautiful Allen Theatre, which has just been refurbished, and it's absolutely gorgeous. If you'd like to see pictures of it, do go to facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. You'll find them there. And all day long, people from different walks of life in Ohio and beyond are talking about the issue of free speech. And we're going to do that and connect that issue with some of the biggest stories around the world today. We've got about 150, 200 people here, but we do have 3 guests up on the stage, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Jamil Jaffer. I'm a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union.
And I'm Steve Dettelbeck. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio here in Cleveland.
I'm Scott Horton. I'm a contributing editor at Harper's Magazine, and I teach at Columbia Law School.
So as Roz said, a lot of people are talking about the news out of Tunisia, the news out of Egypt. The question a lot of people are asking, I think, is whether the freedom of speech and freedom of religion are consistent with one another, whether they're in competition with one another, whether religion is an obstacle to democratic progress. I'll just say at my own organization, the American Civil Liberties Union, we often bring cases to vindicate the freedom of speech. We also bring cases to vindicate the freedom of religion. We've never seen these things as in competition with one another. And in fact, I think there's an argument to be made that both freedoms come from the same kind of respect for the individual. And in the long run, if you don't have one, you can't have the other either. But I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Well, I think I do. I'm a law enforcement official here locally, so I don't deal with foreign policy. But in our legal system, the difference that we draw is limitations on the government as speaker. So people are free to exercise their own religion, practice their own religion, express it. Where we draw the line is that the government here in the United States is not free to participate in that conversation by way of establishing a government religion. So that's the sort of distinction we draw here, and I think you're right. Within that world, there's not a heavy conflict.
Well, I think that one of the essential characteristics of a democracy is this marketplace of ideas where people are free to speak their mind, to argue for their principles. And religion is an indispensable part of that. People should be free to articulate their views about religion. Of course, the problem we come up with is one religion trying to impose its view as a doctrine and trying to suppress the speech of other religions. And this has been historically a very difficult grounds for democracies to tread. But I think in the United States, we've struck the balance by saying free speech is an absolute.
You think that's the right balance?
Yes. And I think American history has been enriched as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have these cases all the time now where people assert that other people's free speech is infringing their freedom of religion, right? And maybe that's nothing new, but it does seem to come up more and more often now.
Well, I think one of the problems is when in evangelizing, many people think that they're right, you're wrong, and it's their duty to persuade you that you're wrong, and then that then becomes a problem.
I guess I'm sympathetic to that argument to a point, but I wonder whether if we were to rule out evangelizing and proselytizing altogether, wouldn't we be ruling out a lot of things that we actually value? There are a lot of arguments we want people to make. We want people to be able to convince their neighbors that they're wrong about things. That's what makes our marketplace of ideas so vibrant. So I guess I'd worry about a rule that suppressed all speech that was evangelical. I'm not proposing that that's what you're proposing, but
no, I'm not proposing that. I'm just concerned that I often ask myself the question: how much intolerance can tolerant people tolerate?
Yeah, and I want to take issue with the idea that speech has always been an absolute. There have always been limits, and one of the things we do here is we protect minority rights to a point. So in other words, it's not okay to take threatening action against somebody based on their religion. It's not okay for the Ku Klux Klan to burn a cross in the front yard of an African-American family's home to try and run them out of the neighborhood, even though the cross might be, to them, a religious symbol. So we've always had those kinds of limits, but where we set the limit is a little tougher to figure out.
Well, I really believe for the most part that it's our religion that drives the content of what we have to say in our freedom of speech. In many cases, it's what you believe, your core beliefs as an individual, that are going to then determine what you have to say and the action that you take.
Hi, I'm Elaine, and I'm concerned when one uses one's religion to inhibit another's freedom of speech, saying that you can't say this or you can't draw a picture of that because it offends me. I think the offense is in the mind of the beholder, and one shouldn't use one's religion to make others unable to speak clearly about their beliefs.
But there's a difference between what one shouldn't do and what one is prohibited from doing. So the marketplace of ideas among private speakers is sometimes kind of rough. And sometimes people disagree vehemently. I think we have to be careful about telling private speakers that they have to sort of tone down their disagreement. People feel passionately about things.
While I agree with that, I also think that making laws or regulations or doing name-calling is not productive to a civil discussion about what needs to be said.
I'm Charles Michener, and I'm a journalist. My interest in this whole issue really has less to do with religion than it has to do with the concentration of power about speech in our society. I'm thinking of the conglomeration of media in this country, government censorship, obviously, more rampant in other countries than here. And I'm interested in how the masses of people give voice to their speech. We've seen a lot of that in the Arab Spring, and we've seen it in the Wall Street protesters here. I think it's a very valuable form of speech.
Sometimes free speech in theory seems a great deal different than free speech in practice. I'm thinking particularly about two friends of ours from Cleveland who recently journeyed to Akron, a short distance from Cleveland, to attend an annual meeting of Planned Parenthood. As they approached the Akron Museum of Art, where the event was being held, they were met by a cheering group of hecklers who tried to persuade them not to go into the meeting and tried to ridicule them. There is the classic case of not shouting fire in a theater when there is no fire. But to what extent do you think that people who try to intervene and to stop people from attending a meeting should be curtailed? Or is that free speech at its purest form?
You know, it's a line-drawing question. Persuading somebody not to go to a meeting strikes me as something that is protected by our First Amendment here in the United States. Preventing them from going by putting up barriers, preventing women from having access to reproductive health rights by physically blocking an abortion clinic or engaging in threatening conduct, that's over the line, and we have a law that prohibits that here in the country.
No doubt this is to determine whether or not a recent high school graduate can read. This is the BBC's World. Have Your Say at the City Club of Cleveland. And we're discussing how faith and free speech fit together.
Jimmy on Facebook writes, people who cry for free speech seem remarkably anti-free speech when it comes to someone's right to speak of their religion.
Rodell in Jamaica commented on Facebook, religion and politics, the two worst things to ever exist. They bring nothing but war all over the world, and anything that causes conflicts should not exist.
The phone number is country code 4420-7083-7272, and our email is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com.
Now, right at the back of this theatre, I can only just see him because it goes a long way back and there are some bright lights on the stage. There's a gentleman on our boom mic. Nice to meet you, sir. Thanks for coming.
Yes, my name is Chris, and I'm a children's therapist. Religion is basically culture, one's culture. Speech is free, but talk is cheap. All over the world, and especially here in America, the poor and the underclass don't have a voice. They don't have access to the public forum, and they don't have any way to exercise their free speech. In Europe and around the country, in the Middle East, the same thing is occurring. That's why there are all these uprisings. People are taking speech away. They're taking it because it wasn't given to them freely.
Well, talking of uprisings, let's take our conversation to North Africa. The Arab Spring, as it's called by some, the Arab uprisings, as we call it on the BBC, began in Tunisia. We're going to speak to Aziz there in a moment. But first of all, let's bring in a number of guests in Cairo who are joining our conversation here in Cleveland, and they would like to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Hafsa. I'm a lawyer.
Hi, my name is Sharif. I'm a unemployed graduate of law school.
Hi, my name is Sanat. I'm a student, high school student.
Hasfa, help us understand the role that religion, Christianity and Islam, is playing in the push for freedom of speech in your country.
Well, I like to steer away from a sectarian discussion on what has happened in Egypt since the uprising began. There's no denying that the pictures in Tahrir during the January 25th revolution had nothing to do with religion. It was everyone standing together, different demographics of society, different sexes, different sects of religion, whether it was Muslim orders or orders of the Coptic faith as well. And I personally believe that what has sparked since is because of a political vacuum that has occurred after the army, the SCAF, took over from when they overthrew Hosni Mubarak, the former president.
So that's interesting. You're characterizing what's happening in terms of politics. Some are saying in terms of poverty, but you're choosing not to see it in terms of religion. Sharif, what about you?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you have a issue where kind of sectarian incidents may from time to time flare up, but I by far do not think that it is the governing factor or even a primary factor in what has been happening and what continues to kind of happen. I think this is an issue with a kind of military control that has gone way, way out of hand and is just crushing any sort of dissent, whether from, sectarian or other circles.
As you're talking, I'll just mention to those of you in Cleveland, we've got two mics on fixed mic stands. If any of you want to ask questions or make comments at any point, feel free to get up and just go and stand there. And those of you listening, whether you're in Egypt or Cleveland or anywhere else, you can phone us on country code 44 2070 83 72 72. I am curious though, Hasfa and Sharif, listening to you, you're both choosing not to characterize these latest problems as being because of religious strife, but surely the main accusation coming from Coptic Christians is that the current regime, the current government in Egypt, is prejudiced against them because they are Christians.
Well, I think that's taken out of context. On a political level, if you're looking at a discrimination against Coptics, that's a grievance that's been growing for many, many years. That's not going to change under a Supreme Council of the Armed Forces that's effectively been in charge for 60 years or 30 years under the previous regime and 60 years of military rule. Further than that, the grievances that they're talking about, economic problems, unemployment, poverty, jobs, wages, this is something that is unified and is diverse across the whole country. It's the reason people took to the streets. The economy is the main factor that sparked the protests and sparked the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak. And their grievances are no different. There has been clashes with armed forces and police with protesters in Abbasiyah, in other areas, Manshiyat Nasser. There have been, yes, sectarian issues in Tahrir itself, and in other parts across the country, in Suez, in Aswan, in Alexandria. There's also had these, it's not specifically the Coptic community. Yes, what happened yesterday was an escalation of the violence, and there's no denying that. But I refuse to completely put the Coptic Christians in one specific position.
Yeah, I'm just
curious. Basically, the thing is, the military or the current regime is brutal to all Egyptians, not just Coptics. So it's not a matter of religion.
I'm wondering whether Hafsa and Sharif, whether they think that that democratic progress in Egypt is going to end up empowering religious radicals, or whether that's something that has been overstated in the press here in the U.S.
I mean, I'd ask, what are we even seeing of democratic processes of kind of transition right now with the Armed Forces Council? I mean, we've seen authoritarian, even fascist suppression of any kind of protest, dissent, or democratic expression from the supposed protector of a kind of secular society. I mean, this army is positioning themselves to be, the defenders of some sort of constitutional democracy, and they were killing people left and right last night.
I disagree with Sharif slightly. I mean, I believe that I personally don't believe that the military forces want to keep power in this country. I like to shy away from saying religious radicals. I don't think there's any real extreme right conservatism here that's any different to what the Republican Tea Party is bringing to the United States and their political process. This is now an open democratic sphere for all political parties, whether it's the Brotherhood political forces in the Freedom and Justice Party or the Nord Salafi parties that are also as long as the far left and the centrist parties. I believe what's happening in terms of clashes between the political forces currently in power is that this is a transitional period. There is a massive political vacuum, and no transitional party, either newly formed after the revolution or was around before the revolution, has stepped up and told the people this is their party platform, this is how they're going to change Egypt, this is the hope they're going to bring to the people, and stepped into that hole and that vacuum and taken control.
But Hasper, the thing I want to understand is whether religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity, is helping bring that change which you say that you want, whether it's an obstacle or whether in fact it's an irrelevance. And we'll ask that same question of Aziz in Tunisia in just a moment.
Hi to all of you listening around the world. This is BBC's World Have Your Say live from the City Club of Cleveland.
Satyendra in Jaipur, India tweets, "Religion was adopted to make animals into human beings. Now human beings are becoming animals for religion."
Ifinyi in Nigeria commented on the WHYS Facebook page, "I recently realized that religion is an invisible shackle enslaving us and hindering us from a practical and a rational approach to life."
You can call us on country code 4420-7083-7272, and the World Have Your Say team will call you back before we get you on the air.
Well, we've heard from Egypt, and certainly we'll go back there in a moment. But let's bring in Aziz, who's live with us from Tunis in Tunisia. Aziz, tell us about the role that religion is playing in helping to give Tunisia the freedom of speech and the democracy that so many Tunisians demanded.
Well, it's not really, hello everyone, it's not really helping in any way, religion actually. We see that nowadays, a couple of days before the first election in Tunisia, we have pretty much two sides, which is one side it's saying, like, it's becoming a really bipolar political thing. It's either you're Islamist or you're completely against religion, which is not true because most of the people here in Tunisia are in between. These people, they didn't really say their words, so probably that's why we only see the two extreme sides. I don't think we should really focus on either you're religious and religion is helping anything in that matter, or you're against religion and you don't want religion to be part of the government.
Aziz, as you're talking, I should describe to you and everyone listening the scene here in the Allen Theatre. I'm up on the stage along with some of the production team and three of our guests. We've got about 150 people in this beautiful Allen Theatre. We have an unusual setup. We've got two fixed mics on mic stands, so various people are waiting to speak to you. They're also very keenly listening to you. And Scott, one of our guests up here on the stage, would like to respond to what you were saying.
Or maybe ask a question. You know, I think if we look at the last few decades, it seems authoritarian regimes have consistently used religious and ethnic differences to justify holding on to power and tightening their grip to power. And is that what we see going on in Egypt and Tunisia today? Is it what we saw before the Arab Spring began?
I agree with a certain part of what you just said. The only difference is we never had this type of regimes before. We had a dictator, which is pretty much, for me, the same thing as having a religious or Islamist government in the future. To me, having a dictator or an Islamic government, it's exactly the same thing. We're not going to have freedom of speech. We're not going to have political freedom. It just ties up the entire system into, like a circle, a closed circle that no one wants. We didn't have a revolution to have nowadays Islamist, government that will rule the future of Tunisia.
Aziz, thanks for that comment. Let's bring in a couple of the listeners here who've got questions for those of you in Cairo and Tunis.
Good afternoon. I'm Franco. I'm a freelance journalist, writer, photographer, and club promoter, actually.
That's quite a combination. But anyway, do carry on.
It is. That's the way it goes. Faith is nothing more than a product of human culture and intellect. But freedom of speech, like food, water, air, is a deep-seated value beyond the dawn of civilization. Therefore, if freedom of speech is presented throughout the world not as a Western value or an American value, but a primal human value that's essential to humanity, then that way I feel it can be embraced much more easily.
Well, I'm fascinated by that. Those of you in Cairo, do you see freedom of speech and democracy as something which is being exported by the West?
No. No, I don't think that's at all.
So it sounds like our guest here doesn't have something to worry about in Cairo, at least. There's another gentleman waiting to join us. Hello, sir.
Hi, my name is David Edwards. I'm a CSU student. I'm the president of the Society for Professional Journalists at my school. My questions, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of in Egypt is that people carry a religious card, and unless you're Christian, Jew, or Muslim, your religion is not acknowledged. So there's been a lot of problems with Baha'is trying to be recognized. So how could you have freedom of speech if your religion is even recognized?
I can see a tweet here from Ron Van John, who is using the free speech CLE hashtag, saying, isn't there a distinction between religion as doctrine and religion as an institution? Institutions demand control, he says. Thank you very much. And those of you listening, if you want to tweet, use that hashtag or the WISE hashtag. I wonder, Jamil, we haven't heard from you for a little while. I'm assuming you were enthused by the uprisings in North Africa. Do you now have concerns about how Islam's fitting into them?
Concerns? No. I mean, obviously we see all this from a distance here, and it's actually it's a real privilege to hear people who are right there talk about it and listen to the way that they talk about it. I am interested to hear more about that reaction to the comment from here that perhaps people might see democracy as something that's being exported by the United States, because that is certainly something that many American leaders think that the United States ought to do, is try to export a form of democracy that the United States has been enthusiastic about.
Well, Aziz in Tunisia, just quickly before the news, do you see democracy, freedom of speech as an American export?
Maybe in a certain way, not freedom of speech, but democracy, definitely.
And is that sorry, I'm curious to hear some more. Sorry to interrupt you, but explain that, Aziz. I want to understand this. Why do you see democracy as an American export?
No, that's not what I see it, but I understand that people can see it that way.
Okay, thank you very much. And those of you in Cairo, I promise I'll come back to you, but we're coming right up to the end of the program, or certainly the end of the first half of it. So hold that thought and we'll come right back to you. Jamil there also talking about whether America should go around the world promoting freedom of speech, promoting democracy. You may have seen that Mitt Romney, the US presidential hopeful, said, God wants America to lead the world. We'll also talk about that in the next 30 minutes. Moses in Uganda has posted on Facebook saying, free speech is an obstacle to religion. We'll keep on exploring these issues.
Welcome to World Have Your Say.
I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to the BBC's World Have Your Say. We're continuing our conversation here live at the City Club in Cleveland. All day long, people attending this wonderful event are talking about free speech, how it fits into the lives of Americans, how it fits into the lives of all of you listening around the world. We started off talking about the situation in Egypt. We shifted on to talking about Tunisia. In a moment, we'll bring in guests in Afghanistan and Syria as well. We do have three guests up on the stage here playing a central role in our conversation. Just in case you weren't listening a little earlier, I'll let them reintroduce themselves.
I'm Jamil Jaffer. I'm a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union.
Steve Dettelbach. I'm the U.S. Attorney here in Cleveland, Ohio.
And I'm Scott Horton. I'm a contributing editor at Harper's Magazine and a lecturer at Columbia Law School.
And behind the three of you, we've got this enormous projector where we're putting up pictures of the event, along with lots of the comments that those of you listening around the world and locally here on WCPN are sending in. Let's hear a couple of those.
Giovanni Marco tweets, Mubarak is out of office, but his regime is not completely gone. This isn't about religion, it's about the growing pains of change.
Bilal tweets, blasphemy is libel, not free speech. Criticism is one thing, but insult is quite another.
If you're tweeting, use the WISE hashtag or the Free Speech CLE hashtag. We'll pick up comments on both. Now, just before the news, I had to interrupt our guests in Cairo because we were completely out of time. Let's go back to them, Hasfa and the others there. Hasfa, do you see democracy, do you see freedom of speech as being something that the West is helping to spread around the world?
No, I don't think so. I think that the uprising in Egypt was a byproduct of the last 30 years and the fact that 75% of this country's population is under the age of 35, and the majority of them, so more than the majority of this country, has known no one and nothing but Hosni Mubarak and his rule. And because there was such a wide demographic of people that were in Tahrir, for some people democracy is a decent job, the right wage, the right salary, a decent quality of life. For some who are more comfortable, it's the right to vote, the freedom of speech. For everyone, democracy and social justice is different, but it was all unified and there was one specific target and one regime that was controlling it. I don't believe that the US or Europe or any of the other Western countries were the catalyst or were any kind of push to what happened. It was sheer frustration that everyone had reached the end of their tether and that there had to be some kind of change. And this was not, weeks in the making or sparked by what happened in Tunisia. This has been years in the making in this country and in the other Arab countries which are seeing uprisings across the Middle East and North Africa.
Hasper, let me introduce you to Steve.
Hi, and here in the United States we have a heartfelt and wonderful tradition of free speech. We have the City Club here in Cleveland, the Rock Hall of Fame, which is here in Cleveland, and it's a great value, but I would be overstating it to say that it's an American value. I mean, the value of free expression and free speech has been adopted by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights unanimously by the United Nations. It's a widely held universal view about human rights, not just American constitutional rights.
Those of you who are listening and want to join in, you can speak live to our guests here in Cleveland and our guests in Tunisia, in Egypt, and soon in Syria and Afghanistan as well. It's country code 44-2070-83-72-72. And I can see Giovanni tweeting using the WISE hashtag. Your message is coming up on the big screen here, Giovanni. It's part of the US moral obligation to support free speech in the world, but not to promote it. Promotion infringes upon sovereignty. Let's talk about that. Do all of you Americans here feel you've got a moral obligation to support human rights, freedom, speech, and democracy?
Why don't you ask the world about what they think about that?
Well, let's hear from our guests here in Cleveland. Sir, do you feel like as an American you have a moral obligation to support freedom of speech?
Yes. Yes, I do. I was going to ask Jamil a question, if I can. Whether or not the union has done anything to help create comparable organizations in other countries throughout the world.
Now, I can only just see it because I've got bright lights shining down on me, but I know we've got our boom mic to a lady right at the back. Hello there.
Hi, my name is Mamie Mitchell, and I'm one of the Cleveland City Council persons. When speaking of the United States' obligation to export either morality or democracy, I think it is basically the United States. Its obligation is to help others determine their own self-determination. I think that if a country is doing the right thing and it is successful, it does not have to promote democracy. It would be a shining beacon and people would draw close to democracy and through their own self-determination examine their government and their form of government and compare the results and let countries make their own determination.
I'd just like to add to that really quickly that let's not forget that America and other Western powers propped up not only Egypt's regime but other authoritarian regimes across the Middle East and North Africa for over 20, 30 plus years, whichever country you're talking about. So when we talk about exporting democracy from the US, let's not forget that it was the United States who supported the Egyptian regime for over 30 years and supported it before that under Anwar Sadat. And also the Libyan regime was supported by the European countries and the British, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's fair in talking about our transition to democracy that the US or other countries exported it. But I fully agree with what your guest just said.
But I guess this is the tension for America, well, not just for Americans, for all people who believe in freedom of speech. How do you balance your national interests with your interest in promoting freedom of speech? What do you think, sir?
My name is Mark. I'm a lawyer here in Cleveland. My concern is that the concept of democracy gets confused with just having elections. And a lot of countries that are really not democratic countries, are really authoritarian regimes, hide behind elections. And in order to have democracy, you need a whole culture. And one of the things that you need in that culture is freedom of speech.
And Mark, I couldn't agree more. And there's a big difference, to go back to Aziz's comments, between politics and government. Politics sometimes gets involved and sort of, unfortunately, play into the lowest common denominator amongst our citizens. Government aspires to protect the rights of people for their highest aspirations.
I'm Jay. I'm a lawyer in Cleveland, and I want to speak to the comment regarding the U.S. propping up Mubarak. I think in a perfect world, the U.S. has always seen the expansion of democracy as a tool of diplomacy in the sense that nations tend not to go to war with each other. But unfortunately, realpolitik, I think, infringes upon that, and sometimes we're stuck with maybe the lesser of several evils.
But you accept that as part of life? It's not something that can't be got rid of?
I think the goal would be to get rid of it, but it can't always happen.
This is the BBC's World Have Your Say, live at the City Club of Cleveland, and we're discussing if America is doing God's work and if promoting free speech is part of what it means to be American.
And just a reminder, lots of you will have seen this story. On Friday, Mitt Romney, who would be the next president of America if he wins the Republican nomination and then goes on to beat Barack Obama, said that God wants America to lead the world, and that God and that America should promote human rights, free speech, democracy around the world as a priority. We're discussing whether you agree with those comments. You're welcome to tweet us on the WISE hashtag. You can get in touch on facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. You'll see lots of pictures of where we are as well. Or do call us up. We'll call you back. It's country code 44-2070-83-72-72. Now, there are two gentlemen waiting to speak to us. I'll just ask you to hold your thoughts here in Cleveland because we're going to take the conversation to Afghanistan and first to Syria now. Malik is joining us from Damascus. He is an activist there. Malik, what's your view of America and freedom of speech? Do you think America's support is essential for those who would see President Assad pushed from power?
I don't think that the freedom the Syrian people is uprising for, is revolting for, is exported from the United States. It's really in Syria, it's the result of 40 years of persecution for the people. So for 40 years, people have didn't have any dignity, they didn't have any freedom of political freedom or any freedom to form parties, any freedom of media, any freedom of speech at all. And that's internal. But people have revolted to get their freedom and dignity from the government. But they were affected, of course, by what happened around us in the Arab world, by the Arab Spring, and the American concept of freedom of speech is not very much favored here because of the United States stance to the Middle East crisis.
So this is fascinating. You're saying you believe in freedom of speech, but at the same time you're telling me the people you spend time with don't buy into an American idea of a freedom of speech. Scott, how do you react to that?
I think this, in part, this is one of the messages of American history itself. Democracy was realized. The democratic revolution was successful because the people wanted, they embraced these democratic ideals. And I think that tells you fundamentally you can't impose democracy and democratic values from the outside, and you can't impose it by any sort of force. It has to come from within the people.
I should mention, and this is a slight digression from very serious issues, tomorrow we're going to be broadcasting from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I can see that Power X Dump has just tweeted, "The Rock Hall's not an institution that promotes free speech, it's a business that hypes terrible bands." Well, that's certainly not entirely true, because I've seen several exhibitions there of bands that I absolutely love. But thank you very much, Power X Dump. And if you'd like to tweet, by all means use the WISE hashtag. We're going to be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this time tomorrow. And if you're listening in the Cleveland area, we're going for drinks at the Harp in Cleveland between 5 and 7 on Tuesday afternoon, if you'd like to come along and tell us what you do and don't like about World Have Your Say, and that applies to all of you here.
And since I was the one who made that comment, of course, all joking aside, artistic expression right now is one of the most important forms of free speech and expression that exists across the world.
So you were responsible for that, were you, Steve?
I think I was the one who said that the Rock Hall is one of the bastions promoting expression, and I think as recently as just a month or two ago, our own Supreme Court has ruled that entertainment and creativity are key components of expression.
Hello, I'm Joe. I'm a student here in Cleveland. I'd just like to make a comment about the Mitt Romney saying that we need to do God's work. If we are a country that has no religion, how can we do God's work if we do not agree on an idea of God?
What he said was that God wants America to lead the world.
Well, what about the atheists in America?
I don't know where they fit in. I'm not Mitt Romney. I'm not Mitt Romney. That's obvious. I may have a suit on, but that's just about where the comparisons end. I mean, what about that idea, though, that there is work for Americans to do, not just in your country, but around the world, that you have a role to play, that it is set that you should promote these kind of values. Do you buy into that? You're looking at me with a furrowed brow. I'm guessing maybe not.
I suppose I do buy into that, but the instant you drag the idea of religion into it, you begin getting in a very gray area.
But help me understand this, Jamil.
Yeah.
Isn't religion right in the middle of it? Every president of America has always been a practicing
The way I
Christian.
think about it is not so much that Americans have an obligation to promote democracy or promote free speech around the world, but I do think that Americans have an obligation not to get it in the way of other people's democratic aspirations. And I think that to a large extent over the last 10 years, that's what we've been doing.
Wally from Cleveland. If I were to have a seizure right here and somebody would come to help me, I would not ask, hey, are you an R, are you a D, are you Jewish, are you a Catholic? I mean, ultimately, I see the arrogance and unfortunately a society of Americans that have created this arrogance that I know what's best, therefore you must believe what I believe. And the arrogance of Mitt Romney to say that he knows what God's will is, I just saw a tweet up there, let's let that be determined in the afterlife.
But what about, is it arrogant to say... But is it arrogant to say, we believe in democracy, we believe in freedom of speech, and if you haven't got it in your country, we do know best. What we've got is better than what you have.
Our current state of affairs right now with two parties that cannot agree on anything, right now is not a good time to say that we have what works.
And it's also pretty... If I can jump in, it's also
I just think it's worth pointing out that when Mr. Romney was addressing the Citadel, the content of what he was saying is exactly the same as any president, or therefore anyone trying to be president for the past 100 years, which is that America should be a leader. He rhetorically used the word God in order to make his case more convincing to that audience. However, the substance of what he said is nothing shocking, nothing surprising. I also wanted to respond briefly to Councilperson Mitchell by saying that self-determination is a very convenient watchword for isolationists. However, the true tragedy of authoritarian regimes is that the self-determination of the people is denied. Self-determination is not some natural thing that occurs everywhere naturally.
And if you're just turning on your radios, World Have Your Say is inside the absolutely exquisite Allen Theatre in Cleveland. We're being hosted by the City Club. We're incredibly honoured to have been invited. And all day long, luminaries from across America and beyond are discussing free speech in a number of different contexts. And today on World Have Your Say, we're taking that very broad theme and applying it to some of the pressing issues in the news that all of you around the world are following. The protests against a film that was deemed to be blasphemous in Tunisia, the unrest in Cairo, and of course, the ongoing unrest in Syria, which is where Malik was speaking to us from.
Mohammed in Cairo commented on Facebook, why did God leave the world without America for some million years?
Kimberly comments on the WHYS Facebook, America was founded on the separation of church and state. All these politicians who use God talk are actually anti-American by definition. This drives me crazy. There's no room for religion in public policy.
Facebook.com/World Have Your Say. No room for religion in public policy. Let me just come straight back, though, to that very... it grabbed me, that phrase that we had from Giovanni, who said, Americans have a moral obligation to support freedom of speech. The vast majority of you are Americans. Do you feel that obligation? This lady in a hat right in the middle.
Actually, I was going to say something about the Mitt Romney comment.
Well, by all means, just answer my question, and then by all means go on to make the comment about Mitt Romney.
I wasn't prepared for your question.
Well, I mean, I think all Americans can answer that. I mean, I guess if you haven't thought about it, maybe you don't feel a moral obligation. I guess it's impossible to feel an obligation unless you're aware of it.
I would say if I were deprived of free speech, I would certainly want someone to help me with it.
I just wanted the three of you up on the stage. Do you think you've got a moral obligation?
Well, not quite all Americans can answer that question, and I'll tell you why. I'm a law enforcement official, and one of, I think, the important lines and traditions we have in this country is that law enforcement officials and the military do not become involved in our elections in this country. And that is a value that I think should be exported. I think we can agree that the military and law enforcement officials shouldn't be coming involved and commenting on and influencing what are supposed to be democratic processes.
My name is Elliot. I'm a lawyer. I think one thing that's very interesting is how everyone seems to be rewriting American history. The Pledge of Allegiance says you're one nation under God. Look at your $1 bill. It says, in God we trust. Theology, right or wrong, has always been intertwined with America.
Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a graduate student at Cleveland State, and actually this gentleman just kind of stole the comment right out of my mouth. But I was wondering if Mr. Dettelbeck and Mr. Jafar could comment on pretty much what he's saying there, is that we try to talk that religion doesn't play a part in our public policy, yet God is on our money, God is in the Pledge of Allegiance, and it seems to be very much a part of politics in this country.
Well, historically, by the way, God, the reference to God was not always in the Pledge of Allegiance. But the idea, though, that government in our country needs to stay out of the business of supporting and establishing religion is older than our Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, one of those brilliant of our founding fathers, articulated in his Articles of Religious Tolerance, even before the Constitution, that the government's role in promoting religion was zero. And I think that's a fundamental part of who we are as a people. That doesn't mean, though, that individual private actors aren't free to express their religious beliefs and to either vote or advocate for certain positions based on those things. So the distinction I draw is between the freedom of private people to shout from the rooftops about their religion if they want, and the prohibition for government somehow breaching that wall of separation.
My name is Jason. I'm a management consultant here in Northeast Ohio. I find it odd to be able to think that I could separate my religion from my decision-making process, since it's part of what creates my worldview. And so I don't understand how I can possibly try to separate them and say, no, I won't think about, if I'm a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or whatever it is, that somehow I can turn that off, because it's like a pair of sunglasses in front of my eyes, and it affects how I see everything. And so I think, instead we have a worldview that respects individuality. So a religion that respects individuality goes a long way towards guaranteeing free speech and influences your actions about how you think about reacting to someone who says something hateful to you.
And Jamir, I know you want to come in, but before we speak to you again, let's bring back in our guests from Cairo, because I know they're interested to pick up on a number of the points that are being made here at the City Club in Cleveland. Do go ahead.
Right, so if I could just say one thing, whether or not, you do believe that America has a moral obligation to support democracy. You seem to be picking all of the wrong people. You're doing it in the absolute wrong way, it would seem, even if you believed you had this obligation. Why is the American government paying over $1 billion a year to an army that's currently beating protesters in the streets? And I'm sorry if I keep harping on this, but this was happening last night. We're talking about freedom of speech in the abstract, and we're talking about this as a value, but when you see a state media inciting sectarian violence, and when you see the army beating and shooting and running over protesters unprovokedly, it really makes it difficult to kind of think about how one is going to talk about the proper role of free speech, and particularly the American exportation of that value abroad.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to just
just
chip in about
Hasper, just before you do, let's bring in Scott, because he wants to respond to that.
I think it's an absolutely fair point. In fact, I think that's the dilemma that the U.S. government has faced throughout the Arab Spring, being tied to governments that were, in fact, being tied even to Gaddafi in Libya, certainly to Egypt, to the government in Bahrain and Yemen, and so forth. And the government has to make a decision to sever this relationship or pull back when those governments begin to repress, to take away speech rights, to brutalize demonstrators, and so forth. And I think we hear the right words from President Obama on this when he gives speeches, but I think there's a real question about how he acts on it. And Egypt, I think, is giving me a lot of worry right now, Yemen as well.
Hafsa, do come in. I apologize for interrupting you just then.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to expand on the whole religion and politics argument, and in particular what's happening in Egypt. It seems like there is this sudden fear from external or outside forces in the Western world about what's happening in Egypt, mainly pivotally, of course, because of the Israel factor and the Arab-Israeli conflict, but this fear born out of the Salafist movement and the Muslim Brotherhood. The reality is that these movements have been around for years. The Muslim Brotherhood was formed in 1927 or 29, I think. So it's not about the fact that they're suddenly taking over the political vacuum that's happened in Egypt right now. It's more that for the first time after 30 years of suppression, their voice is being heard. This country is and always will be a majority moderate country. It is not a country that wants neither the far-right conservatism nor the far-left. It is a moderate country, and the Islamic base of people are not extremists. It's not about a radicalization of the religion. We're not Al-Qaeda. It is about importing conservative values, using the religion as a base for that. I'm not
So we'll learn a little bit more
about
about exactly what Egyptians do and don't want from their leaders and from their representatives when we have those first elections.
And Scott, to answer your point, you know that all that President Obama talk's a good game. Talk is important. Speech is important. That is what we're here today to celebrate. So that when President Obama goes to Cairo and speaks about aspirations and hopes of freedom, and then wins the Nobel Peace Prize and is criticized, right? He's criticized. All he's doing is talking. And then we look a year or 2 years down and look at the amount of change that has occurred in the region and the amount of role that speech and Facebook and communication played in that revolution. I think it's important also to recognize that speech and expression and the right speech and expression support aspirations that are key and important ones. And we shouldn't talk them down.
No, really, I need to ask something. Are you suggesting that President Obama's visit was in any way useful to our country?
You know, I might have an opinion about it. I'm not going to suggest what your opinion should be, but I think when the President of the United States talks about, I think when the President of the United States talks about hope and aspiration and tries to bring people together instead of dividing them, I think that that's a helpful thing.
But you have to balance that against the fact that, you know, there are billions of dollars flowing every year from the U.S. Treasury into the Egyptian military, and that has been that's been the source of a big problem here. They maintain order, but they're doing it quite violently now.
Also, the export is going in the other direction right now, right? If you look at the Occupy Wall Street protests, so much has been learned from the protests that have been taking place in the Arab world. And I think, you know, maybe we're asking the wrong question. The right question is, should we have been paying more attention to what was going on in the Arab world earlier than we did? Because we've been learning
Let's
about
ask the question. We've got a couple of minutes. Who has watched the unfolding of the various Arab uprisings and felt regret that America didn't do more to support change over the years? Have any of you had that emotion? Jamil seems to be suggesting that he feels that way. I wonder about the rest of you. No one's putting their hands up, which makes me think that maybe you haven't. Did you reflect on that, Scott? Did you reflect on that, Steve?
I agree with Jamil about this. I mean, I wish the U.S. had been working more with civil society to build freedoms in these countries and less with the militaries and the intelligence services. I think we put the emphasis of our activities on the wrong side of the scale.
Steve, have you watched the news, whether on the BBC or NPR?
I'm a guy from Cleveland. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but there's some element of darned if you do, darned if you don't in this. Oh, if you go abroad and you promote what you want and you support somebody, oh, you know, well then you're just saying what's best for everybody. But if you engage in national self-interest and realpolitik, of course, there's something wrong with that too. So I guess one question I have for some of the people we're talking is, well, maybe isn't it possible it's a little harder than it looks?
Victoria in California wrote on Facebook, America needs to concern itself with the kind of democracy it hasn't yet achieved before it starts preaching to the rest of the world.
Cindy Bailey tweets, is faith-based authoritarian rule an aspiration of office-seeking ideologues in the United States?
That's a big question, one we won't be answering in the next 20 seconds between now and the end of the programme. To Steve, Scott and Jamil, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on World Have Your Say. Thank you very much for your time. To all of you who have gathered here at the City Club, we appreciate it as well. And a particular thank you to those of you at the City Club and at WCPN for having us back in Cleveland. It's been a real pleasure. Fortunately, this isn't it. We're back at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame tomorrow, and we're having a drink at the Harp in Cleveland if you'd like to come along. But to all of you here and to all of you listening, thank you very much for your contributions. I'll speak to you tomorrow.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.